is up, people? It is Dave Duncan back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from French art rockers Klone. The band's new album, Meanwhile, will be released on February 10th via Kscope. So album number 7 from Klone, which follows up the band's 2019 album, Le Grand Voyage. And since that album, Klone have risen to new heights across the globe, touring alongside the likes of Leprous and Pain of Salvation, and blowing away festival crowds at Hellfest, Motoculture, Prog Power USA, Midsummer Prog, and Cruise to the Edge. Back with the new album Meanwhile, the band return with sprawling textures, huge guitars, and beautiful melodies to satisfy progressive metal fans and rock listeners alike. Recorded in February 2022 with producer Chris Edrich, who has worked with Tesseract, Leprous, The Ocean. Meanwhile chronicles the best and worst aspects of humanity. Vocalist Jan Ligner's high concept and oftentimes meta lyrics paint a picture of events taking place at the same time but in different places, while he muses about choices that are made against our will that can change the course of our common history, resulting in some poignant reflections about today's world. So, Duncan.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, we have been following these guys since about 2015, I think.
Yeah. The Dreamers Highway, I think, came into the old site for review.
Dreamers Hideaway, yes.
Yeah.
That would be about 2015.
Yep, 2015, and then we got to see them. I had my instead of doing the standard stag or bachelor party.
That's right.
Like me and you went for a wonderful Japanese meal, and then took in an all French extravaganza in Glasgow, where Klone opened up for Tropalium, who were also opening up for Gojira. All on the same bill, and all three of those bands were fucking incredible. And I think that was just before Klone made the switch. So up to that point, they still had a bit more of an aggro feel.
Yeah, and that was the last heavy-ish kind of album that they did.
Yeah, but they were already. But even on the Dreamers Hideaway, they were all. If you even listen to their stuff before then, which had been heavier, it was a transition. So anyone that would like to throw out the idea that Klone have sold out, it's been the longest sellout in the history of like they've been telegraphing it for a while that as the band have grown older, they've matured more, their sound has as well. Like a long time into listening to this band, 7 years, and Meanwhile is out, and I'm very excited to talk about this one. I think this I think this. I'll be interested because both of us have feelings about Klone in that we both really, really like that heavier stuff they do. But that's a long time ago now, and to be honest, I don't think they put a foot wrong in the transition to what they're doing just now. So we will see where we both land and whether or not we're friends at the end of it.
Okay, well, I'll let you go. I'll let you go for the first one. You go.
Thank you very much.
Tell me.
So let me just, in broad terms, let me just talk about Meanwhile. This is an album which delivers songs it's an album which predominantly exists within one tempo frame. It never really moves beyond that, which in a lot of respects should be frustrating, but to me, never is. The weird thing about this band, and I don't know how they do it, I would really like to know if it's more about me as a listener rather than the band, but their songs are so immersive that I lose track of time when I'm listening to them. Like genuinely, like when you listen to almost any of the songs on this one, notwithstanding the ones that have more quirkier instrumentation, so instruments out with the standard guitars, drums, bass guitar. Notwithstanding those, I find it slightly disorientating, and not in a bad way, in that you can be listening to a track like Bystander, for example, which was one of the lead singles, and you can be about halfway to it. It's almost 3 minutes in, with no real concept of how long you've actually been listening to the track or how long is actually left, but just being lost in the moment. And that's how I would describe the album as a whole. This is to me is a lost in the moment album. Listening to it is just like allowing yourself to give complete control of your attention to a band who will just continually paint for you these wide, sprawling skyscrapes of interest. And it's like if Bob Ross, remember Bob Ross? If Bob Ross was a band, Klone would be that band. Because every time you're listening to something, he's like, we'll just put a little bush down here. He's a little friend. That's kind of like what they are, because whenever I'm listening to it, I'm like, this is really, really cool. And then they're like, you like that, Duncan? How about this soaring melody? And you're like, I didn't even know I needed a soar. And then it comes in and you're lost. You're lost in it. Yeah. It is an album that just really... swoon is the word I would use. I swooned I didn't headbang through this one.
No.
I swooned all the way through this. I think, like, you go from the opening track, which is Within Reach, which really is the Rosetta Stone for everything you're going to get here. They never really move, like I mentioned before, tempo-wise, too far away from this one, but it sounds fucking massive. This is an album that is produced exquisitely. Every nuance, every little instrument piece is perfectly placed, and the vocals soar, and then you just continue to roll on through it, whether it's in Blink of an Eye, which expands the sound, and it interestingly expands and contracts the instrumentation without never sounding like it loses anything, which is weird. It's like putting things on a scale and then taking things off a scale. Like, we don't need that anymore, but the weight stays the same. Yeah. It's a weird album to get into, and they start playing around with I think it's kind of like Middle Eastern instrumentation on Blink of the Eye. We were speaking off air about this. Elusive kicks in track 5 with a big old sexy baritone sax right underneath, right at the start, and allows you to have a little section of that, and it disappears, and you're like, oh right, well I kind of dug that sax, and then later on it comes in with a little bit joie de vivre. It really, really hits in. But it's perfectly placed. All the instrumentation here is perfectly placed. It's all really well written, and it's all used in a way where it never feels overused. There is no gimmick here. There's a band that feels very true to themselves and very happy to exist in a world where they continually paint pictures for the listeners. By the end of this one, the first time around, I was kind of at that kind of sigh moment where you're just like, oh man, that was an experience. And then I always get the fear about those things, about, like, will the second listen be one of those ones where I start picking apart things with more? And to be honest with you, that never happened to me. I've listened to it 4 times all the way through, even though it's a stream. I hate streams. I prefer having the download copy. We'll let you off this time, Kscope. But I went back to it four times, and every time I listened to it, I had exactly the same feeling of a band that just allows their sound almost hypnotically to wash over you. The album has some incredible highlights. Tracks like The Unknown or Disobedience really build up like chunkier sections of guitar, but never heavy. That's the beauty of the band. There's weight to it, but it's never heavy. And I can see why, in the aforementioned bands I've toured with, all those tours work, and I can imagine on heavier festivals they still have the heavy stuff in the back that they can pull it and do those songs and get people in, and then really just allow them to paint for the audience. Also, when you were describing, I was kind of thinking how funny it was when you were mentioning like prog, like for prog fans or rock fans. Rock fans are not stereotypically prog fans, and vice versa. But Klone could bridge that gap quite comfortably without any great deal of stretching. So I think they've tapped into something really, really interesting. There aren't many bands I can think of that do what Klone do. There are bands that kind of sound like them, but I don't think they're bands that are wholly committed and so confident enough to release 50-minute albums which really are designed to allow listeners to lose themselves while listening to it. And the last thing I'll mention is the production is incredible. It really, really is. And it is still a French-sounding... The French are the weirdest people, honestly. It's still a very French-sounding production. And like, if you've listened to a lot of French bands, you'll know what I mean when I say French. Like, the French production sounds very different. Like, French bands, it's maybe bands more than actual production.
Could be.
French bands have a very distinct lane that they sit in, and this is on the more vibrant side of that one. But there are a couple of moments, and it's sprinkles in there where you get a heavier riff.
Yeah.
And those moments of like the Dreamer's Hideaway, like Rocket Smoke or something, you start to feel it creep in.
Yeah.
And they clearly don't want to do that sort of stuff anymore. They're happy to play it live, but they don't want to do it anymore. And to be honest with you, I'm with them if they don't want to do it. They seem much more interested in doing what they're doing just now. And I think we're spoiled as listeners to listen to it. I think this is, once again, I should be like the criticisms I throw at other bands, specifically the tempo. That usually to me is an issue, that when I hear tracks that never really move out at the same speed, it's usually a bugbearer with me. But on this one, I think they pull it off. And I think they pull it off because they're just really fucking good. They've got good bass playing on this is fucking insane. The guitar work is exquisite. All the extra instrumentation is brilliant. Their drummer is awesome.
Yep.
And vocally, this is about as close to a chef's kiss as you're going to get from these guys. It's an immaculate album. It really, really, really is. Is it my favourite interpretation of Klone? Probably not. I still like them with a bit more gruff, but this kind of version of this band, I think, is hugely hugely interesting, and they have more than solidified themselves many times over as a band that I genuinely look forward to listening to what's coming next. So, Meanwhile's fucking great. I love that.
Nice. Yeah, I think this album kind of hears Klone reaching deeper into that sound that they've been perfecting over the last 6-7 years, something like that. The huge kind of sprawling soundscapes, they sound even bigger. And they weave between the progressive rock, a bit of progressive metal, and then there's that a little bit more kind of experimental side comes in at times as well. As you said, this album does stick to a fairly steady pace. There's nothing here that will jump out at you and shock you with its speed, really. But it doesn't mean that the album doesn't have power, because it absolutely does. And what they do here with the balance and rhythm and dynamics, they do exceptionally well. They're still using, the odd kind of quite interesting time signature on certain tracks, which gives them their own flavour. So even though these tracks feel similar in tempo, you can still differentiate most of them. I think this is probably their most fine-tuned album to date. The last two albums I liked, I quite enjoyed, although I didn't feel like I totally connected with them. There were moments on those albums where they maybe went a little bit more off-piste, or there wasn't enough of a hook or something like that, to keep me in. I don't feel this album falls into the same category as those. This is very expansive, very grand, but I didn't feel like they were flexing too much, that it sounded like overpowering. They've definitely refined that kind of delivery of the transitions a bit more. It doesn't feel meandering at any point, to the point you'll get lost in it. But it's still progressive enough that it feels quite, exploratory as well, and it delivers hugely on the way they build to a climax, both musically and vocally. I think that it took me a good 3-4 listens to fully kind of to soak it in. And I felt as I started to get more into that, the 3rd, 4th listens where it started to kind of click into place. But it did feel like an album that you do have to go back to quite a few times for the kind of choruses and those like kind of transitional build up, just to kind of fully get stuck in there. I think Jan sounds fantastic on this album. I think vocally he is at a place where he can do pretty much anything he wants. Whether that's like the soaring cleans, which he does a lot of in this album, and there's a track called Disobedience where he does do a kind of lower kind of growl just for a second. It's the
only track he does it on.
I know.
And it's a snippet, and he's like, nope.
That's it. That's your lot. But even though it's predominantly clean, it does remind me a little bit of Jonas from Katatonia in a few ways. They don't sound tonally similar, but I feel like that their style and that the levels that they have to their voices are quite comparable. I think Jan's lyrics, I think, have also gotten better. And that's happened over time. I think on this album, he's written some of his best work. It's very thoughtful. It's well phrased to give you more of that kind of memorability factor. And his choice of melody is fantastic. I think some of the lines on Elusive are really like, you get that kind of goosebumps, the kind of feeling on that track. It certainly did. I think, he's completely nailed it in terms of the range it delivers, and even the harmonies that they've done as well are very, very good, very smooth. Musically, this is like very meticulously crafted. There's detail in the layers here, from just even like little kind of bass moments, little licks from Enzo, where he just maybe like accentuates a riff a little bit, the little bits of synths in the background, in a chorus, the lead work on tracks like Apnea that kind of sweep in and out to add ambience. The drumming though,
he's a really underrated drummer. He really is.
Morgan, just like great feel, like just very natural feel to his playing. Doesn't feel mechanical or rigid. Very, it's very flowing, very versatile. Not unlike the other Frenchman, Joe from Gojira. That's Joe. Is it Joe the drummer?
Yeah.
Mario.
Mario. No, Joe's a front man. Dave.
Yeah. Very, very similar in style in terms of their feel. But it's all there. Like it might take you a couple of listens to kind of digest it all, but I think once you start to notice all the little additions, this album becomes more and more impressive. The little sections of sax are an excellent touch. And I know, like last year, sax was the instrument of choice last year, but
if we could have given if the Grammys could have given out like an award to like MVP instrument in the metal genre, it should have went to the sax last year. Like almost every track we heard a saxophone on in an album in our genre last year was kind of like, this is perfect. They use it very tastefully. It almost like it kind of adds like a calm, like kind of dreamlike kind of feeling to the mix. It's a versatile instrument, Dave.
Very cleverly used.
It's a versatile. It's about sex, but it's also about sitting on the dock of the bay. Versatility. I mentioned obviously Klone have started to kind of dial back on the kind of heavier moments over the last couple of albums, and this while this album isn't stylistically as heavy as their early material like Black Days or The Eye of the Needle, this album is dynamically quite heavy. That there are moments on here that sound huge. You can hear like tracks like Bystander or The Unknown, Disobedience as well. There's a very kind of like chuggy, kind of riff heavy verse and a very kind of progressively heavy ending. And the closing track as well has some pretty awesome kind of groove riffs on it. But I think those moments, although they don't dominate the album, they work well because of the way they are surrounded by that cleaner, more spacious side. And it makes those heavy moments sound even bigger. I also think the production has a lot to do with it. It's pretty immaculate, really. Just massive in size. That kind of sheer kind of like magnitude that Chris Edrich has created on this is really impressive. It's got a kind of auditorium feel.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely, 100%. He's worked with bands like The Ocean and Leprous, so he's used to that very expansive sound, and I think he's nailed it on this. The production is flawless. This is a very, very high level Klone. I think it's definitely up there with their best releases for me. Really enjoyed this one. What you thinking scoring wise for this new album from Klone?
So it sounds like we're not going to fall out, which is good, Dave, because we've still other reviews to review tonight, so that would have been awkward. 4.5 from me. I think this is there's nothing I would change on this album at all. It's not my favourite Klone release. But I would agree with you. I think this is probably the best version of Klone there's ever been. So I really do. I really like even as much as I love the balance that they had between the heavy and those more kind of spacious moments on the Dreamer's Hideaway, which I think is a fucking amazing album. And I would score that above that. I don't think the quality of all the songs on the Dreamer's Hideaway is at the level that they are here.
True. Yeah.
And it's a better written album. It shows a side of the band which is maybe not completely in line with the style that I liked of them at their best. But it is an immaculate art. This deserves to, once again, elevate them. Like, you could, I mentioned auditorium before, you could go and see these guys at like a proper sit-down auditorium and be blown away for 2.5 hours.
Yep.
They could do it with, and by the sounds of things, they could do it with fucking ease.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a 4.5 from me, Dave.
Yeah. I'd 100% agree with that. 4.5 from myself as well. Definitely worthy of a high score. It's very well thought out, very polished, a lot of great moments. I'd agree with you. I love the Dreamer's Hideaway. Like, it's an album that I go back to a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've only been listening to this for a short space of time, so I don't know if, like, in a few months, further into the year, maybe I'll feel more about this album. I don't know. But yeah, at the moment, I'd say 4.5. It's a very strong album, absolutely. Klone, and Meanwhile, out on February 10th on Kscope. I will put some links below to the band and the pre-order link. Check them out, have a little listen, see what you think. Worth going back and checking out their older stuff as well if you can.
Oh yeah. There isn't really a bad album. That's the thing.
No, really.
They have no bad albums.
No.
Like, the sound gets heavier as you go back, like a reverse Benjamin Button. Like, it's heavier the further you go back, but there's there's maybe a bit rough around the edges, Dave, but it's all fucking great.
Yeah, 100%. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.